being with us. I'm going to yield to my good friend, Ms. Maloney, who has to leave very shortly.
So, thank you so much for your leadership and for yielding to me. I'm supposed to be chairing another meeting at this point. I have to leave. Mr. Scardino, I was really touched by your testimony, and I want to go back to the one point where you said they were reporting car 125, and you said you were under the car bleeding, thinking you were going to die, and you had to wait for well over an hour to be rescued because the police wouldn't go in because of the threat of this assault weapon mowing everyone down. Could you elaborate on that? Did I hear you correctly?
Yes, you did hear correctly. There was this eruption of gunfire. There was one police officer. There was an eruption of gunfire. There was a police officer actually on scene before the fire department. It's normal course for a Webster officer to respond to all of our calls. He was actually ahead of the scene, and like myself, he thought that the shots initially were tires and shocks popping. But as he saw the fire was dropping, quickly realized it was gunfire. He returned to his vehicle, obtained his rifle, and started shooting back. However, none of the other police officers could enter the scene. At that point, it was unclear whether there was one gunman, multiple gunmen. All that was heard was a lot of gunfire. It was dark at the time. It was 5:45 in the morning. And it was really several hours before all of the police officers, the entire county responded. It wasn't just the Webster community. The Monroe County Sheriff's Department was there, adjoining towns, sent police officers in. They had border patrol with helicopters. The state police were there. It was unclear where this guy was. All the neighbors received reverse 911 calls to stay indoors, and methodically they cleared the scene. It was about, as I said, 7:30, 7:15 when the SWAT Bearcat rescued me. However, they still didn't know where he was. They didn't eventually find him until 11 a.m. He had walked to the shores of Lake Ontario and shot himself there.
Well, I truly do believe this whole tragedy could have been prevented. If straw purchasing was in fact a crime, if his neighbor knew she was going to be facing 20 years, she would not be going out and buying rifles and assault weapons for him. And Ms. Ganji is not in prison now. She's not been punished, is what I heard.
Not yet.
Yeah. Now I have one question, and then I've got to leave. Do you think that passing this law, making trafficking in illegal guns, trafficking in guns a crime, and putting real teeth and punishment behind straw purchasers, do you think that would help save law enforcement lives? Do you think this is an important tool that you need? Just yes or no?
Absolutely.
Yes, go down the line.
Yes, absolutely. Without a shadow of a doubt.
I think that should also be very clear on that form, so that people don't think it's just a paper violation. It needs to be clear there that this is punishable by 20 years. So if people read that, they're going to think twice.
Well, I want to thank law enforcement for putting your lives out there to protect us every day, and we at the very least should pass the laws that give you the tools to do your job. Thank you for what you do for us every day. Thank you. And I, for one, will work every day with my colleagues to make sure this becomes a law that will help protect you and other Americans. Thank you.
Mr. Richard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Levon, I'm going to direct my questions to you, sir. Again, thank you all for being here. The testimony was really compelling, and I appreciate your presence here today. Mr. Levon, I need a little bit of help just to understand what associations might be out there with respect to federal prosecutors and prosecutors in general. So would you say that are there many organizations that represent prosecutors, or there's a point in me asking this here?
Certainly. There are two major organizations. One would be ourselves, the Association of Prosecutors, or APA, and then the other is the NDA, the National District Attorneys Association.
All right. To your knowledge, and I know you really can't speak to the other group, but just to your knowledge, is there any group that really prosecutors, either formal or informal, that would hold a view different than the one that you've expressed here?
Not that I'm aware, and especially not on this particular issue.
I would think so. I just would note for the panel today that this legislation enjoys and has strong support of the prosecutors that I know, and Ken Stolley, our local sheriff, and Virginia Beach, Bob McCabe, our sheriff in Norfolk, have expressed strong support for this legislation, and help us to understand how you might respond to the response by some, and I think it's a genuinely held position that, well, we really don't need to go down this path because we just really need to focus on enforcing the legislation that's currently on the books. We hear that often. Now, in this particular case, on this issue, I don't hold that view. I sit here in support of the legislation, of course, that we're talking about here today. But how would you respond to those who say, look, it's just a matter of enforcing the existing law?
Well, thank you for that question, because that was one of the things that I tried to address in my earlier testimony, meaning that a year and a half ago, when the ranking member came to me, or came to my organization and said, what is weapon trafficking? It was a shock, and as I shared, I came out of California, but it was shocking to look in the federal code, and I have here, prepared today, the list of all the federal violations. But to be able to look at it and say, there's nothing here about what a weapon trafficker is, and there's nothing here about straw purchasing. You can sometimes get to it by doing a paper violation, but you end up in that world of, did they really know what it is, and what were they intending at the time they did it? And those type of paper violations are incredibly difficult to prosecute. So to those that say we should be prosecuting the laws that we have, I say, give us the law, and we'll go ahead and do it.
And I strongly share that view. There is a deficiency in legislation as it's currently written, and this legislation wisely addresses that. One final question for you, and do you see any infringement on the rights of a lawful gun, either a current gun owner or someone seeking to lawfully purchase a firearm if this legislation were to become in effect and become law?
No, sir, I do not. Same way, we are an executive branch function as prosecutors. The Constitution is our guide. The Second Amendment is very clear. There's nothing in this proposed legislation that infringes on the Second Amendment rights.
Well, I share that view as well. And not only are their rights not infringed upon, they're not even inconvenienced. It has nothing to do with the person who is a lawful owner or a lawful desiring to lawfully purchase a firearm. And as I've shared with others, when people get a hold of guns that shouldn't have them, and they use them in these heinous acts that have been so painfully described here today, I have a problem with that because inevitably it infringes upon my rights as an American citizen, my Second Amendment rights, and the rights of all who want to lawfully own a firearm, our constitutional rights. So that's why I stand with and proudly for this legislation with my colleagues, Democratic and Republican. It does represent common ground, and I would hope that our colleagues on both sides would slow down and read this legislation. It is needed, and I think we need to change the culture in this country where it's not okay to buy a gun for someone else. We had the tragedy in our own area where the school teacher was killed by an adult who bought a firearm for a 16-year-old. And the penalty for that, Mr. Chairman, by the way, is 15 months in prison. And that's not enough, as far as I can tell. And that doesn't reconcile with my personal views on this matter, and that's why I support the legislation. Thank you all so much for being here, and I yield back. Thank you.
So then just do my 5 minutes of questions now. Mr. Chief, sir, and I guess this would be directed to Mr. LeBon also. I've been thinking about, I used to wonder how in our inner cities you end up with so many guns. So I live in the inner city of Baltimore, and I talk to young people, and they tell me they can get a gun just as fast as they can get a cigarette. They have the money. But in doing this and going through and working on this legislation, I can see how it easily happens. That's basically what you described, Chief, sir. And I was thinking when the criminal folks are trying to figure out how to make money, a lot of them will go to drugs. And they also now have guns that they can go to. And it seems that because of this big loophole, they have a far better chance of doing their dirt and not being prosecuted. Am I right, Mr. Lord? In other words, if you were to compare this to somebody trafficking in drugs as compared to trafficking in guns, because of the kinds of the loopholes that we're talking about today that this bill hopes to address, it seems like there would be the chances of prosecution are much greater with drugs as opposed to say, for example, guns.
There's no question in my mind.
And why do you say that?
Because in the drug area, in the drug trafficking area, we have very good specificity within the law. What is it required to be, the sales or the movement? What is the substance that's involved? What are the quantities that are involved? We have lots of laws and effective laws that are on the books. We don't have it here in the area of the guns. The other thing is that drugs and guns run together. My understanding of Officer Fox's killer is the reason why that straw purchaser purchased the weapons for that particular killer was because of his drug habit. That every time he needed a couple more $100 to go buy drugs, he went and got another gun and passed that gun. So they weave together, and that is, again, we have good laws on the books on the drugs. We do not have them, especially as far as the straw purchasing on guns.
Chief Judge, did you have a comment?
I spent a certain amount of time in narcotics, and I can tell you that the federal minimum mandatories with regard to narcotics trafficking are measured in years significantly. As the district attorney spoke earlier, there are no laws regarding gun trafficking on the books at all, so there wouldn't be any minimum mandatories.
So, Mr. Scardino, I guess going back to your story, I want to thank all of you for being here. But as I listen to your story, it's a chilling story. And when you found out that the gun was purchased through a straw purchaser, I mean, what was your reaction? I'm just curious.
The initial reaction was it made no sense at all. How this could have happened, and how I guess what bothered me even more is once we found out the details of it, the fact that she's facing virtually no penalty out. I mean, I talked to the prosecuting attorney, and she's likely to get 3 to 5 years on the high side if convicted.
Last but not least, one of the things that came out of the Oversight Committee, his investigations, was that the penalties for straw purchasing were so low that if there was some type of conspiracy going on, they could not get the person who is literally caught making a straw purchase to work a deal and tell on whoever else is involved in the process. Would one of you all, or whoever might want to comment on that? And how significant is that?
Well, this would relate directly to the federal law enforcement efforts. And yes, when you're looking at a statutory maximum of many of the violations under 18 U.S.C. 922, you're looking at a lot of 5-year offenses if you can prove them. And then, as was discussed today, if you make it a 20-year offense, now you've changed the landscape. And as far as trying to use that individual for, say, going after a larger trafficking or a cartel, if it's a 5-year maximum, the likelihood of any cooperation is very slim. You now make it a 20-year offense, and the likelihood of cooperation, I look to the chiefs that are here, is so much greater.
Anybody else? Mr. Connors.